everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. I will be giving a quick introduction soon, but we're just going to wait until everyone is able to get into the Zoom call and settle in, so it'll just be about a minute. Okay, looks like it's about 12:04, so it'd be a great time to get started. As I said, I would like to thank you all for being here with us today. Just as a few housekeeping notes before we get started, I'll be giving a short introduction before we go for a few words from our moderator to introduce the conversation. Then we will be passing off the baton to Sharon Lewis, and then our next panelist, Justin Farmer, before we go into our moderator-led conversation, and we finish off with a quick 15-minute Q&A. This Q&A is able to be participated by everyone. If you hit the Q&A button at the bottom, you should be able to submit a question. As it's currently set, only the panelists, so the 5 of us, can currently see these questions, but feel free to ask anything that's on your mind or any questions that come up. Now, today's talk is hosted by the Yale Center for Environmental Communications and the Yale Center for Environmental Justice. So the Yale Center for Environmental Communications is at the School of the Environment, and there we conduct research on the psychological, cultural, and political factors that influence environmental attitudes and behaviors. The Yale Center for Environmental Communications also teaches students, trains working professionals, informs and engages the public through environmental journalism, and supports a global network of organizations seeking to build public and political will for environmental solutions. This event is also co-sponsored by the Environmental, which is a joint undertaking between the Yale School of the Environment and the Yale Law School, in partnership with the Yale Center for the Study of Race and Transnational Migration and Indigeneity. The YECJ is committed to strengthening institutional capacity to empower frontline communities to lead change by catalyzing partnerships and expanding interdisciplinary research, teaching, and practice in environmental justice. In addition, the Yale Center for Environmental Justice promotes an expanded definition of environmental justice, recognizing the lived experience and interconnected systemic inequities that shape environmental inequity. So today we have 2 panelists. Our first will be Sharon Lewis, who runs the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice, whose purpose is to improve urban environmental health, primarily in Connecticut, through educating the community, through promoting challenges in government policy, and through promoting individual, corporate, and government responsibility towards our environment. Then we will hear from Justin Farmer, a 25-year-old activist and elected official. He is currently serving his 2nd term as a legislative councilman representing Hamden's 5th district. Justin's experience as a seasoned community organizer has enabled him to build some of the strongest grassroots campaigns in state history. And our conversation today will be moderated by Professor Gerald Torres, who is a pioneer in the field of environmental law and who has spent his career examining the intrinsic connections between the environment, agricultural and food systems, and social justice. His research into how race and ethnicity impact environmental policy has been influential in the emergence and evolution of the field of environmental justice. So I will be passing the baton off to our moderator, Professor Gerald Torres, if he has a few words before we will then go into the presentation of Sharon Lewis.
I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I want to make sure the bulk of the time is given over to our panelists. What we're going to explore is are the problems facing local communities in persuading policymakers to actually step up and make the changes that need to be made in the context of environmental justice. Sharon Lewis is a leader in the state and has vast experience in dealing with the legislative process. And so I'd like to turn it over to Sharon at this point.
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here and very happy that you were able to take some time out of your day to meet with us during your lunch period. Boy, this is difficult for me because, as Professor Torres has said, we've been doing this for quite some time. The Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice is a statewide organization that has been working hard for at least 23 years to fight the environmental injustices that negatively affect the health and well-being of what we call marginalized folks, those folks who are on the fence lines and the front lines of the polluting facilities where they live, work, and play. We try to expose environmental injustices, and we also bring awareness to the fact that these injustices occur to not only the general public, not only the folks most impacted, but more importantly to the politicians and the policymakers. It's been very difficult for us to create change through the governmental lines because it's a constant education process. Some of the things that we do is we have lobby days, we meet with the various committees that are germane to our cause. We meet with the environmental committees, the public health committees. We meet with various caucuses like the Black and Puerto Rican caucus. We have our members make calls, we send emails, we sort of ambush politicians wherever we see them outside of the state capitol. We prepare our members to provide testimony in support of or opposing various bills that would affect them. And we're also very concerned about how the politicians balance what we tell them with what they also hear from very strong and powerful lobbyists. So it's very difficult for us to create change, but sometimes we win.
Great. Great. I don't know if you want to continue, or we can turn to Justin, who brings us a local perspective on producing change.
Well, I can continue a little bit talking about something that's most recent. Just to give you an example of some of the struggles and compromises that we've had to make with the recent bottle bill in Connecticut. We were quite taken aback by the fact that many of the politicians that we spoke with were more concerned about the increase in the 5 cents in the bottle bill of the bottle deposit than the increase in pollution that would be caused by burning unrecyclable plastic. They were more concerned about the 5 cents additional charge than the unsightly litter that inundated many of the neighborhoods in urban areas. And we're quite taken aback by that because our members were very angered by that. And they wrote letters to us and to the legislature to stay out of their pockets, number one, and that to give them an opportunity to choose whether or not they wanted to pay the additional 5 cents. And they were not willing to be exposed further to more pollution from additional plastic that was burned in regional facilities where they lived. It's really weird because for many, many years, poor people and low-income people and people of color, Black, Indigenous, POC, everybody, they've been paying an additional charge for plastic bags from the grocery stores for at least 20 years. And yet the politicians apparently didn't know that. And they're pushing back on, oh, you can't put this additional charge on the poor. And the poor are like, where have they been all these years? We've been paying 10 cents. We understand that it is part of our environmental responsibility to not litter the streets with these single-use bags. So it makes all of us like shake our heads like, where are the politicians? They are so out of touch with reality. So a part of that is trying to educate them to make them understand that they are. And the lobbyists, like I say, were our biggest threat because they were putting this information into the legislators' minds using the poor as the lead-in discussion to, well, you can't, these poor people, and these poor people were sending us letters like, how dare you, stay out of my pocketbook. If I choose to pay an additional 10 cents, let me choose to do that. And in fact, the reality is that many of the people who collected the bottles and cans were very happy with the raise because Connecticut had had the same 5 cents bottle deposit for more than 20 years. And it was time to increase it. But more importantly, the belief was that if you increase the bottle deposit, there would be less likely to throw a bottle or a can on the streets. So with that, I'll turn it over to Justin.
Thank you, Sharon. Justin, let's turn to you. You are in an interesting position, right? Because you're both inside and outside, right? You're inside government, but you are an organizer as well, right? And so your perspective may be a little different, but I'd love to hear it. So.
Thank you. No, just to build off of what Sharon just said, you're going to have to educate us, right? I always say I'm an activist elected official. I view this job, this position on the city council, any elected position, as a glorified switchboard, where our job is really to connect people to connect people to other people to deal with the issues. I'm just going to share some stories with y'all to give you perspective. Hamden was actually one of the first places in the country to ban the use of styrofoam, which was a big deal in the early 80s. We were one of the first communities in the country. McDonald's actually came down national and lobbied heavy on getting rid of styrofoam cups and getting rid of styrofoam in general. And we had a ban for about a decade, a little bit more, 13 years. And then it was repealed. Now we have styrofoam. To do such a styrofoam ban again at the state level, legislation has been passed where you can't do such a ban like that. So only the municipalities and communities that had done it before are grandfathered in. 2 years ago, we did a plastic bag ban. It was great, tons of organizing on it. I happen to be the environmental chair. My colleague, Brad McDowell, championed the bill, lots of long meetings, being in leadership as the majority whip, pushing my colleagues on the plastic bag ban and the straw moratorium to use paper straws if possible, as some people with disabilities can't use them. And it was great and it was amazing. And then COVID happened and the mayor revoked the plastic bag ban because everyone was scared of COVID and people thought throwing away plastic bags would be helpful and less potential to get COVID from paper bags. It absolutely blew my mind and frustrated me to hear arguments like that. But the plastic bag ban was temporarily repealed. It's back in place now. But I say all that to say, I think the big thing that people have to do is to become organizers. You can get a ton of wonky people who know an issue back and forth. You can get people who are passionate. But if you don't know how to organize your community, you're not going to be able to really get people together and to fight back against things. And when we did the plastic bag ban, we probably had 80 community members come out and say they support the ban. And it was several of my colleagues who happen to be conservative who reached out to the Progressive Bag Alliance, a think tank from DC, to come down with phony figures about how great plastic bags are, and they're not really single use because everyone reuses them. And I think the scariest thing about it was throughout the argument and throughout the debate, as I was counting the votes, there were several moments in the debate where we didn't have enough votes. And it just happened to be that no one picked up on it, and we were able to push some other people and text certain constituents of other counselors that we knew had influence. We were able to get the bill passed. So my big thing to everyone, if anyone takes anything from what I say, we need lawyers, right? We need environmentalists, but we need people who know how to organize. And if you don't know how to create a wedge issue, if you don't know how to identify power, if you don't know what a wedge issue is, cool. You need to go back to the basics and, read Rules for Radicals, right? Read from some radical leftists on ways that you can really push that aren't always the mainstream of just showing up to the meeting and making demands, because that doesn't always actually get the results we want to see.
Thank you. Now, what I'd like to do is to for you and Sharon to be in conversation, because you're both working on this issue at different levels, right? And for Sharon, one of the questions that seems to me to be critically important, right, is how do you overcome the funding disparities between the lobbyists, as you described them, and the community groups? And it seems to me that Justin might have an answer to that, right? But I wanted to hear Sharon's response first.
It does seem to be that Justin has the answer, and I'm waiting to hear that answer, Justin. How do you overcome? We're still trying to overcome, because it is significant, and oftentimes we work on no budgets. Our budgets are so low, we don't want to consider that as a budget. Funding to groups of our nature is not what funding is for the mainstream groups. And as a result, we've had to be chief cook and bottle washer and sweep the floors. And, I'm an example of having to do everything, having lost a major portion of our funding. And, a lot of folks would quit and get another job, but I can't do that, because I'm not only in this for the long run, but I live in an environmental justice community. I have relatives who live in environmental justice communities, and I understand what it's like to not be able to thrive or succeed financially or physically due to illnesses that are pretty much heaped upon you by being assaulted on a daily basis by pollution that you breathe, that you drink, or contaminated land that you live on. So it's not a situation where I can just walk away. It's very difficult for us to even convince the funders that it's important to provide us with adequate funding in order to do our jobs. And that's why I'm so grateful for the Biden administration, who has done a great job in not only elevating the profile of environmental justice, but letting the world know that, especially the United States, that environmental justice is an issue that affects millions of people, and that we need to pay attention to it. Because when it comes to climate change, we are the first and hardest hit, the least able to recover, but we are also the least contributors to this thing called climate change and global warming. So I'm very happy and grateful that Biden has done this. And if I can just put a plug, I'm super excited by the fact that one of your own, Marianne Lato, Engelman Lato, has been tapped to join the Biden administration as, I believe, a co-counsel for the EPA. And that's critically important, because there are many, many other justice warriors who have been in the fight for decades. And we're very pleased to see that Marianne and other folks have made that step. So Justin, please explain to me if you have an answer for this funding situation.
I'm gonna lean on what I know, organizing, right? And it depends on what your tactics are and what you want to see. 2 years ago, there's the Yale-Harvard game. I was one of the protesters who took the field, and that was a shoestring budget, right? We did not have much, but we were able to have a big impact and have a big conversation. Sometimes it's the question of, what do you actually need, right? There are plenty of nonprofits and organizations that I've worked with where I'm like, how much do you have? And what do you do with it? And where does it go? And then there are other organizations that I see that have very little money, but they have good discipline in their organization. And they have people who are committed to the cause. but they have people who are going to spend the time, the people power, right? The man hours to make something happen. And they're going to be clever and creative in ways of how to do it. I think the frustrating thing about this is that this is important work, right? And all labor should be appreciated. And we shouldn't have to scrap together and beg and plead to get resources to fight for our planet, right? We all benefit from this labor. We all benefit from this organizing. So that's one thing. The other thing that I love to plug people with is that reach out to community foundations, right? Reach out to legislators, right? They have pots of money, right? But a closed mouth doesn't get fed. So even people that we know we don't agree with, you can organize to pressure that person into a back corner where they have to give you $5,000. And then you figure out how you're going to get the next 10,000. And then you're going to figure out how you hire someone off of that to do the work. As Sharon and other people will tell you, this is what they do, right? They figure out how to either befriend someone and get them to the table, or put them in a corner where they have to either have to put up or shut up. But there's always people power, and that's something that we always will be able to tap into.
But Justin, I hear you. I'm sorry, go ahead, Professor.
No, go ahead. What I was going to say is that he does go back to organizing, right, which is key. So Sharon?
Well, I hear you loud and clear, Justin. It's just that I want to make the point that, and I see people offering different websites, different funders. What you need to understand is that we have access to funding, but it's a percentage. It's a drop in the bucket compared to what other folks get. And $2,500 is not going to do anything for us, although we do accept it. $5,000 isn't going to do anything for us. And yet what the other groups get $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 to be able to do something meaningful. I've had to underpay my folks, and the other groups pay their people a livable wage so that they can work. Almost everybody who's ever worked for me has always had to have another job. I've not been able to provide benefits because we get so little money. In fact, the word general support is something that I just had to learn what that meant, because our organizations don't get general support funding. We don't get funding to pay for whatever comes up. We get specified funding that the funders tell us what to do with, and oftentimes it doesn't meet the needs of what we really need to do. In fact, I'm very disappointed that sometimes the funders stir up the pot too much and cause problems, forcing partnerships and coalitions that are not equally yoked. And as a result, the people on the front lines, the people doing all the work, never get the credit for any of the wins. It's the bigger organizations get all the credit, get all the credibility. And it worries me because, we're working, and I still have scars from 6 years ago fighting to shut down the power plant in Bridgeport. But nobody knows about that. They just know about the other folks who didn't do much, but they got more money and more credit. And it really bothers me a great deal that people say, oh, well, there's money out there. There's not enough money out there. And people need to understand that there's not enough money. Another thing I want to bring to attention is I'm very insulted by the fact that a lot of the funders feel that if they give us larger amounts, that we're not able to handle it. It's like, oh, I get $100,000 and I lose my mind. Well, they need to understand that $100,000, a lot of us are aware, we're familiar with money, we know how to handle money, and why is it that I have to prove to you that I have a system in place in order to handle $100,000 when you give millions of dollars to other people who screw it up and you just toss it under the table and don't want to talk about it later? I'm tired of jumping through hoops when other folks don't have to jump through hoops. And I'm tired of getting the scars and getting beat down every which way you turn for absolutely nothing. Like I said, I haven't gotten paid in 6 years. And I'm tired of overusing my volunteers. And I use my husband's money. Hope he's not listening. And God, I can't believe I said that. And I buy food for people. I pay electric bills. I mean, it's just amazing what you have to do to keep people engaged. But the other groups don't have to do that.
No, so there's two themes, right? One is that you've got to put together power, right, through organizing to counteract the lack of funding. One. Second is that the groups that you are in opposition to often come in much better funded and because of that funding better connected. Well, let me put a little different question. So one of the issues is the necessity of persuading elected officials, both to vote in a particular way, but even before that, right, to get issues on the agenda. I was wondering whether you participate, either and Justin or Sharon can answer this, whether you participate in drafting proposed legislation, or whether there's a mechanism for you to get kind of model legislation that you can propose to legislators. Justin?
The answer to that is yes. Justin,
Yeah,
go ahead.
well, I would say yes. I'm going to make a plug now, right? I am a member of DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. And we have a lot of people who are doing a lot of great work all across the country. And right, we want to share ideas. We want to make them popular. We want them in popular discourse. We want to have the same commonality of language. So there's many organizations that have policy out there, or people who are willing to write policy, like the ACLU, right, who want to help community partners. And in many, the new wave, a lot of these organizations have to at least say on paper that they're working with local partners, right? And that gives you the ability to be the face of the movement, because that's what we really need. Random people who don't look like me, who are not Black, in a homogeneously Black Caribbean neighborhood coming to organize a community. People are going to be like, cool, sure, whatever, right? But being able to go to these community organizations that have the wealth and really put it to them that you need to lend your resources. If you're serious about this work, you need to empower people, you need to train people, and you need to use those resources where you cleverly can to get around some of the funders' dictates. That is one way of funding stuff, but also a lot of these organizations are more than willing to write policy or to help draft policy. The last thing I'll say on policy is reach out to legislators, right? When we wrote the plastic bag ban, we reached out to legislators all across the nation who had wrote bills already and asked them what roadblocks they ran into, asked professors, right? Professor Torres is in front of us, right? Ask professors, they have ideas, right? And then look at what your opposition is writing and think about how to pose the question to people who write the policy. How do we get around that? If they're saying we can't do X, Y, Z, how do we legally go around that? Or how do we create something ambiguous or pick an issue that's ambiguous to potentially get the law to be changed?
Well, you are correct, Justin, and we have done and continue to do all of the above. In fact, just yesterday, the Sierra Club sponsored a call with Connecticut advocates and New Jersey advocates who passed New Jersey's latest environmental justice law, which is the best in the nation right now. So, we are very familiar and we do that all the time. But I want to also touch on something you mentioned and something I mentioned. This is our second year. We have started an advocacy school for BIPOC and by BIPOC. And the reason this is so important to be for BIPOC and by BIPOC is that we've been in this struggle for way too long to not get the recognition that we deserve. We've been in this struggle for way too long to send a message to our supporters and to the folks on the lines that the only way that they're going to get educated is by the white people who take all the credit. So what we do is we have our advocacy school is taught by people of color for people of color, and we teach them how to write grants, how to navigate the legal system how to protest, how to do simple things like write resolutions or request freedom of information, all the things that the other groups who are well-funded are able to help us do. Now we want to be able to do it for ourselves, because there's nothing more discouraging than to win a fight and not get the credit for it. It's almost like you're totally breathless, like, what just happened here?
Right. No, I understand that. And I also understand, and the point you made earlier, Sharon, and Justin represents I'm speaking for myself, the youth. But the point you made earlier is that it's a long road. It's a long road, and so part of it is a part of organizing. It seems to me, Justin, is not just to organize to address specific issues, although that's necessary, but to organize for the long fight, right? And that it's difficult, I know, to maintain the kind of enthusiasm over time. So you do need specific issues. But I want to go to ask a really specific question. Now I'm going to put you, Justin, in your role as legislator, right? Because you're an elected official, right? So you're going to put your legislator hat on, and Sharon is, in her role as persuader, right? So what does it take to persuade an elected official to act?
It depends on the person. For me, it's pretty easy. I'm just like, cool, you pull at my heartstrings, I'm there. For others, it's purse strings, right? But I think anyone recognizes power, right? Power, if you have money, right? If you have people, right? So there have been issues that we've worked on in the past where gone to a legislator and said, hey, I want to work on this. And for whatever reason, right, there's like, it's not my thing, right? But when they're able to turn out people, all of a sudden, I've seen legislators who are like, hey, I will pick up your issue if you can get me 20 people for my issue. I don't even really know what your issue is. I don't even really need to understand it. But if you can turn out 20 people for my issue, sure, I'll give it the time of day. I'll highlight it. I'll do what I need to do. Another motivation, right, is door knocking, right? Knock on doors for campaigns. Even sometimes when you're, I personally have a very hard time knocking on doors for anyone, unless I know what the cause is or why I'm knocking on doors. If I'm knocking on doors on behalf of another person, I can do that. If I'm knocking on doors on behalf of a particular community that's going to pick a wedge issue, I can do that. But if you know someone has power, go knock doors in their district, whether it's for them or just knock doors and start educating their base, right? Because if their base starts to talk about the issue, we just did this with Medicare for All in New Haven, right? There are some people who were on the fence about the resolution. In a couple of weeks of knocking on doors, talking to their constituents and getting signatures and petitions, all of a sudden they saw the light of day and they're like, I have always stood for Medicare for All. I've always supported it, and I think showing that power really gets some people to the table, whether they agree with you or not. Now you have their attention.
So what Justin said, Sharon, the last bit is really important, it seems to me, right? Because if I can summarize briefly, one is politicians know how to count, right? And they can count dollars and they count votes, right? And so that matters. But it's also a question of getting their attention. Right. And so both of those factors go to the question of how do you get something on a legislator's agenda? And Sharon, I would wonder if you'd address that.
Well, I'd just like to back up a little bit because Justin, you have described standard operating procedures for all organizers when it comes to, door knocking and, like I said, ambushing politicians. Unfortunately, we do get their attention, but they ignore us. And one of the major reasons they ignore us is because they also know that we don't vote. And that's been a very, very big challenge for us. In fact, let me just give you a quick story about what happened in Bridgeport about maybe 7 years ago. We went around to a P.T. Barnum housing complex, which had like a 0% voter percentage. And we had a big rally. And I asked people to register. I never asked anybody to vote. So they're like, well, why aren't you asking us to vote? I said, first of all, if I ask you to vote, you won't vote. But second of all, it's more important to register because registering is like putting the bullet in the gun, letting the legislators know that you're ready to fire if they do something wrong. So this is what happened. They were complaining to me about, P.T. Barnum being totally ignored, and they were. But once we got 1,500 people to register, guess what happened? Politicians came. They want to see, oh my God, there are no fire escapes here. They want to hear people. And all they did was register. That's all, because all of a sudden they were on somebody's list. And the politician's like, oh my God, this could make or break an election. I better get over there and see what these people want. So I say that to say it's extremely important and very challenging for us. But one of the things we do is when we get our new members at our rallies, we pass out T-shirts. And on the front is our logo. And on the back is registered voter, because we also registered them at the very same time. And it's amazing how powerful that picture is when we're at a hearing facing the politician, but when we're about to leave, we turn around and stand for about 1 minute to let the politicians read that we are registered voters. And that's new to them because they often take advantage of us and take us for granted because they know we don't vote. But our folks do vote, and we let them know, we know who you are, we know where you are, and we will take you down with just 1,500 votes.
I want to thank you for that. I've in the past have said, when I've been asked to talk about environmental justice or environmental issues, and I've said, registering people to vote is an environmental practice.
Yes, it is.
Right, period. Right. Like, so that it's one of the most important things we can do. Right. Is if you're concerned about the issues and you're concerned about democratic processes, then getting people registered to vote is one of the first steps in environmentalism. Even as you educate people about environmental issues, what you want to do is make sure they have the capacity to exercise the power, at least the voting power that they have, as you continue to mobilize them. So I completely understand exactly what both of you are saying, and having. Well, let me just say, my first job out of law school, I worked for Marion Edelman down in Mississippi, and her rules were litigate during the day and organize at night. Right? When you sleep is up to you, but that's what you do, and so because the organization is critical. Right, making sure there are people there who understand the issue and will stand up should you win for the victories that you achieve, and to recognize that even when you lose in a particular fight, the fight itself is educational. Right, and so you can go to the well a lot of times, and eventually you may prevail. I wonder if it would be time now to turn to the Q&A, and I will moderate the questions that are in the question and answer box. For those of you who are out there listening to it, you'll see the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You can click on that and add questions to the queue. Obviously, we'll get to as many as we can. I have a lot of questions for you because for you, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. So let's turn to the Q&A. And the first one is from Lorena Venegas. And she says, what is the best way to fundraise for East Haven and New Haven environmental concerns regarding the Tweed Airport expansion? Tweed Authority Board is a quasi-state organization appointed by the mayors. They should give the community money to get the hydrologists and engineers to prove wetland and flooding issues, high asthma rates, noise, and air pollution. I go to New Haven City Plan meetings, and no one is handing out, or no one is reading our 100 pages of public testimony. So what do you do? Sharon or Justin?
I'm reading the question again. It's
Well,
a lot in there.
I would say the first thing is, right, pass around the bucket, pass around the hat. You know, even the small things of printing out paper to post on someone's door, even if everyone throws in $5, right? Reaching out to those people and say, all right, do you have 5 friends who can help us? Coming up with a budget is really helpful, even if it's advantageous and it's just like, it's not realistic, right? But if you come up with a $10,000 budget, you're going to figure out how to spend the money if you get it. So if you come up with that, then you can go to people and say, hey, this is what we want to do. This is kind of what we're thinking about. And eventually you're going to run into someone who has the background to write a grant and get some serious money. But the first thing is talking to your networks, right? You always have to do a power map. Who are your friends? Who are your allies? Who's against you? Who's for you, right? So if you go and talk to all your friends and you find out, heck, I did this the other day and I found out there was a friend where I'm like, hold on, you have a lot of connections to money. I've never asked you for money. How did I never know this aspect of this connection? Like, you're on this big board and know all these people who have money. How come I never knew that? So I would say, talk to your people, ask them to talk to their people, have guided conversations. What organizations are they part of? Who would they invite into the work? What organizations have they been in the past? And all of a sudden, you'll be able to find the money.
So I'd like to, before I turn to Sharon, I'd like you to explain a little bit. You mentioned creating a power map. That may not be a familiar concept to some of the listeners. Why don't you talk about that for just a second?
I would say the long and short of a power map, right? You look at who has power in the issue that you're organizing around, right? Who can influence it, right? And then you map out, all right, who is that person close to? Maybe I don't have any connections to that person, but maybe 3 people away, removed, I actually have a really good influence with that person. And I can ask them to talk to that person up, right? Maybe I know I don't have a great relationship with this other person, but I do know if I protest in front of their house, they're going to shut down. They're not going to do any work, and they're going to do everything in their power to prevent us from moving forward. And you got to kind of identify people where they are on the issue. Are there people that you can reason with? Are there people that you can talk to and say, hey, can you kind of stay out of the way? And then figuring out the people you can build with, or the people who are kind of with you, but they just aren't going to use their power to push on the issue until you move them.
Sharon, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
I do. I will just briefly add, because I know we need to get through all the questions, that there are funders who provide money to do just what you want to do in New Haven and West Haven. You just have to write a compelling proposal that pretty much fits what their program requires. Also, there are associations of hydrologists and engineers who would be considered good resources that you could go to for pro bono work. In addition to that, you could work with the state of Connecticut's Department of Public Health to get data and statistics on the asthma rates and the noise and the pollution, and the Department of Environmental and Energy Protection. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. I can't believe I forgot D. But go to the various state agencies who can help you with getting all the data that you need. And as far as getting the word out about the public testimony, everybody uses Facebook today. And I recently found out there's a very, very good tool to get certain messages out to the general public.
So Kathy Fay asked a question, or just wanted information, and I don't know whether you could put it in the chat, but she'd like a link to a fact sheet or a fact sheet where she can share information for training, through BIPOC training institutes.
Thank you so much. We're preparing now for our second cohort, which will begin in October, and it's called Boots on the Ground. The whole purpose, as I mentioned, is to train BIPOC by BIPOC. But in addition to that, we want to be able to provide boots on the ground to go to anywhere in the United States and the world to assist struggling communities who are at the beginning phases of fighting a new issue or an older issue where they would need expertise that we're going to provide. So I will put it in the chat, and if I can't get it in the chat in time, Kathy, please send me your email address and I'll forward it to you.
Great. Diane Lauricella, I hope I pronounced your name right. I apologize if I didn't. What she says is communications and messaging can move an issue forward or kill it. How much of your organization or the council's time is spent on detailed messaging and education? And do you use layman's terms?
We're very well known for our exemplary leadership development programs. And we train folks how to provide public testimony, how to write testimony, how to speak orally, how to speak persuasively. We train them how to meet with the media and everything that they need to do in order to create change. And yes, it is in layman's terms.
Okay. Justin?
Yeah, you meet people where you are, and in terms of where you spend your time, it's talking to your people, right? You might need more time to talk through and figure out what your strategy is than you actually need to push on the issue. But if your people aren't together and unanimous on what's the best way to move forward, you're undoubtedly gonna slow yourself down as you move through the process.
Good. There's two questions I'm going to combine because I think they could be usefully answered together. Laura Brown asked or said that we've heard a lot about external barriers. Could you speak to the primary barriers that are internal to your institutions, government, academia, nonprofits? What are the barriers to this work? And then Matthew Goldberg asks, how can the research academic community best help? So I'm going to combine those two questions because I think they're related. Justin?
I'll try to be bold and brief. Things like community choice aggregation, having municipal utilities and public democratizing power, right? This is a big, heady, wonky issue. When I talk to my colleagues, their eyes gloss over, right? So I would say, right, knowledge oftentimes is a barrier internally. I think another internal barrier is process, right? Oftentimes process is either obstructive by nature or just lethargic. And I think those are some of the internal barriers where there are times we know there are issues, like for instance, fracking. We did a fracking gas ban. Part of the reason why it took so long was just to schedule a meeting and a public hearing, and the process to do that delayed us from having a vote for 2 weeks, almost 2.5 weeks, where it's just like, cool, we all know we're going to do this, but the process got in the way.
Sharon, I don't know if you wanted to address the question. Then we can go to the second part of that question too, which is how can research and academic institutions help? Okay, so Sharon.
Okay, yeah, barriers. That's my life in this field. There's always something to get over, another hurdle, another mountain to climb. And our primary barrier is funding, but what people don't understand is with the folks who are most impacted by environmental injustices, one of the things that I've had to deal with is making sure people are healthy, making sure they have food, making sure they have housing that's safe and healthy, making sure they have a way to get to work, I mean, I provided rides to work, delivered food to people, hot and cold. You know, we even have our own mutual aid society to assist people when COVID hit. And even now we're trying to get donations now to replete, to fill the supply of funding that was repleted by our recent outlay of funds due to water damage from the torrential rains. So there's, you know, it's a lot of barriers to getting people out there, getting people to work, getting people to understand, because they need to be able to be healthy enough to do this. So it's not easy. It's a very difficult job for us.
Justin, do you want to address the second part of the question, which is, you know, how can research and academic community help?
Reach out, right? I'll drop my information, right? Let's link, let's be in community. But I really think understanding power and organizing is probably some of the best ways to help. Not every legislator knows how to assess power. I am the most senior council person. This coming election, I will be the eldest Democrat on my city council with 3.5 years of experience. So there are times where even your legislator just doesn't know, right? They don't know how to build power. They don't know how to build a constituency. They don't know how to make a wedge issue. And you as an advocate or a researcher or a scientist or a lawyer, knowing that, can identify people that you know who are, you know, who are rooting for you and who want to help you. They just don't have the skills, but they're in the seat. So everything just falls back down to me, to organizing. If you learn how to do that, you will learn how to identify power, and then you can teach others how to pick those sites and empower them to get involved.
Sharon?
Justin, thank you so much for saying that, because in our advocacy school, Boots on the Ground, we have this exercise called power versus position. And we tell people that they have the power. The politicians have position, but the power lies with the people. And we're trying to indoctrinate them with the fact that, you know, they have the power already. We're teaching them how to unleash this power, how to realize that they have this power. And it's been a struggle, it's been a challenge, but it's working.
Good. Justin, there's a question that I know you want to speak to, and Beth Weinberger asked a question. Does education from advocacy organizations actually move the ball with legislators, or is it really about hearing from constituents and those directly impacted?
I would say it depends on the legislator. Again, always going to your community is never going to hurt, right? Some legislators, once they understand the policy or once they understand the scope of the issue, they'll be moved. But it really doesn't matter. Even if they are immovable and are just going to be a fixture, right? As long as you bring the conversation into a public discourse and have a commonality of language, that constituency at some point will pick a legislator who's ready to be the champion on the issue.
Sharon, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that issue. The question is, you know, did the advocacy organization actually move the ball, or is it really about hearing from constituents and those directly impacted?
That's a difficult question for me to answer, because I'm still waiting for the realization of that. I would be, when I was younger, I was very optimistic. 23 years ago, in fact, my husband always says, who was that 18-year-old person who thought she was going to change the world? How's that working for you? And I'm not going to tell you my age right now, but it's more than 18. And I say that to say it's still a work in progress. And as I mentioned, you must understand and accept and realize that people of color are marginalized and ignored, no matter who they are, no matter how many rallies they show up to, no matter how many lobby days they go to. The politicians tend to take us for granted and do what they want to do, knowing that we don't know how to come back at them because of that. We also know that people of color tend to vote without understanding all of the the background information, outstanding all the issues without understanding the legislators' voting record. These are some of the things we bring to our people's attention. You know, don't just vote because they say vote for them. Look at their record. What have they done for you lately? This is what you need to vote for. So it's still an educational process for us. And as I mentioned, I'm still that 18-year-old girl who believes that one day before I die, I'll change the world, but it's been many years. And nothing's changed. The needle hasn't changed yet.
Yeah, but you know, the point I made earlier, and Sharon, you just underlined it, right? Is that it's a long road, right? And people sometimes think they can outlast you, and that's why organizing matters, right? Because that's the way you build longevity, is by organizing. So it's not just you; it's the community you're constructing that is concerned about the issue.
But it's also, and please forgive me for interrupting, but people need to understand too that, you know, and Justin, you're way too young, but people of color have been used and abused for so long, and they have vivid memories of promises that were never met, promises that never materialized. So it's hard to continue to talk to people about voting and registering and protesting and meeting with legislators when time and time and time again, they were just called out for a Kodak moment and sent back home, and they get none of the benefits. They get the promises that are broken. That's, to me, my greatest challenge. How do you convince someone to stay in the fight after being beaten down and lied to over and over and over again?
I think you kind of answered your own question earlier, though, which saying is you got to remain committed to registering them. Yes. Because that's making sure that the community has the capacity to respond in the way that at least elected officials can understand directly. Yes. We're at the top of the hour, so I want to be mindful of people's time. I want to thank Sharon Lewis and Justin Farmer for joining us. I want to thank all of you who participated and asked questions. Obviously, this debate can go on. It will go on. The Yale Center for Environmental Justice welcomes people like Justin and Sharon to work with us. Those of you who are interested in environmental justice, reach out to us. We're going to be learning from the people who experience this. And I think that's one of the key things. All right, Tom, back to you.
Thanks so much, Professor. I would say that one of the worst parts about the Zoom webinar system is just that we can't hear the applause that I'm sure everyone is giving right now on their own cameras. But I would like to say thank you to all three of you. It was a wonderful conversation. I personally was taking notes, and there's a lot to digest and a lot to think about. You know, organizing does remain key. And as you said, Professor Torres, organizing for the long fight. It is, as you pointed out, the top of the hour, so we should wrap up. Again, thank you to everyone. And I will say that in approximately 2 weeks, we will be having the next event in this event series. It will be with the meteorologist, Jeff Masters, and he will be talking a little bit about his journalistic work. Again, I will finish us off with a round of applause and say thank you.
Thank you.
Hope to see you.
So thank you for having us.
Sharon and Justin, thank you very much. I really appreciate you giving us this time this morning.
You're welcome. Thank you again.
And we'll be back in touch.